As of now, we've been learning about phrases, and now we'll learn about what clauses are. A clause is a part of a sentence or a sentence itself with verb and subject. So clause அப்படிங்கிறது ஒரு சென்டென்ஸுனுடைய பாகமாகவும் இருக்கலாம், இல்லை that itself can act as a sentence. Clausesக்கு verbும் இருக்கும், subjectும் இருக்கும். A clause can function as an adjective, adverb or noun. ஒரு சென்டென்ஸில் clause it can take the function of an adjective or a noun or an adverb. A clause may be part of complex sentences and they may or may not give complete sense. Below are some examples of clauses. Let's analyze each of them now. In the first clause paranga, who is coming tomorrow? This is an example of a clause and the reason is it has a subject and a verb. The subject is who and the verb is. And in the situation this is not giving a complete sense. முழுமையான meaning தரல. Second example பாருங்க. As long as I stay here. This is also an example of a clause and the reason is it has a subject and verb. I is the subject and stay is the verb. Even in this situation it doesn't give a complete sense. But look at the last example. The baby is crying. This is also a clause because it has a subject that is the baby and a verb that is crying. And in the clause it is giving a complete sense. முழுமையான meaning தருது. This is how clauses may or may not give complete sense in certain situations. Now it's time to look at the types of clauses. Totally there are 5 types of clauses. They are independent clause or main clause, dependent clause or subordinate clause, noun clause, adverbial clause, and adjectival clause, also called as relative clause. Let's learn each of these type in detail now. Starting with independent clause. Independent clauses are also called as main clause. It is a clause that can stand alone, providing a complete sentence. நம்ம இப்பதான் படிச்சோம் that clauses may or may not give complete sense. So independent clause அப்படிங்கிறது என்னன்னா a clause that gives complete sense. So what is the role of independent clause in a sentence? It can stand alone, it gives a complete meaning, it can form a complete sentence, it has verb and subject. So let's see some examples for independent clauses. The first one is the dog barked. This example can stand alone because it gives a complete meaning and it can form a complete sentence. It has a subject and a verb. The subject is the dog and verb is barked. Since it follows all the above said rules, this is an example of independent clause. The second one, Ram and Paul eat chocolates. In the clause you have a subject that is Ram and Paul. You have a verb that is eat. And this clause is giving a complete sense, thereby forming a complete sentence. So that's why this is also an example of independent clause. The last one, he will not come to school today. This is also an example of independent clause. The reason is it has a subject and a verb. The subject is he and the verb is will not come. And this clause is giving a complete sentence. That's why this is also a main clause. Moving on to the next type of clause, that is the dependent clause. Dependent clauses are also called as subordinate clause. A clause with a verb and subject that does not give a complete meaning is a dependent clause. It cannot stand alone nor express a complete meaning. Dependent clausesலையுமே சப்ஜெக்டும் வேர்பும் இருந்தாலும் அது ஒரு முழுமையான மீனிங் தராது. அதனால அது ஒரு செப்பரேட் சென்டென்ஸா ஆக்ட் ஆகவும் முடியாது. And there is one more thing you have to remember. Mostly dependent clauses begin with subordinating conjunction. Let's look at some examples so that you'll understand better. When it saw a snake. In this example, you have a subject it, you have a verb saw, but still this clause doesn't give a complete meaning, so it doesn't make a complete sentence as well. And that makes it a dependent clause. And this example begins with when, which is a subordinating conjunction. The next example is whenever they come here. This clause also begins with whenever, which is an example of a subordinating conjunction. It has a subject and verb, which is they and come. But this clause doesn't give a complete meaning. That is exactly why this is also an example of dependent clause. The last one, because he is sick. In this example, because is the subordinating conjunction, he is the subject and is the verb, and this clause doesn't give a complete sense, thereby not making a complete sentence as well. That is why this is also an example of dependent clause. இதுக்கு முன்னாடி நம்ம படிச்சோம் that dependent clauses form part of a complex sentence அப்படின்னு. So let's see how that works. A dependent clause can act along with a main clause to form a complete sentence. Look at these examples. The dog barked when it saw a snake. In the sentence, the dog barked is the main clause and when it saw a snake is the dependent clause. The second one, Ram and Paul eat chocolates whenever they come here. In the example, Ram and Paul eat chocolates is the main clause and whenever they come here is the dependent clause. Moving on to the next example. He will not come to school because he is sick. In this example, he will not come to school is the main clause and because he is sick is the subordinating clause or the dependent clause. The last example is, I will go to school if it does not rain. In the sentence la pathina, I will go to school abdingrada main clause and if it does not rain abdingrada dependent clause. So this is how dependent clauses and main clauses join to give a complete sentence. Let's look at the next type of clause, that is noun clause. A subordinate clause that acts as a noun in a sentence is a noun clause. Noun clauses can act as a subject or object in a sentence. Noun clauses begin with the words what, whatever, who, how, whoever, when, whenever. And keep this thing in mind, noun clauses answer the question what. Let's look at some examples so that you'll understand better. Whoever wins this project is brilliant. In the example, whoever wins this project is the noun clause. The reason is it is the subject in this sentence and that is why it is a noun clause. The second one is I don't know where she lives. In the example, where she lives is the noun clause. The reason is where she lives is acting as the object in this sentence and it answers the question what. I don't know what and the answer will be where she lives and that is why this is also a noun clause. The third one, he wonders why his brother bet him. In the sentence, why his brother bet him is the noun clause because it answers the question what. He wonders what and the answer will be why his brother bet him. And even in this sentence, this clause is acting as the object. The last example is, the biggest point of concern is how she scored the top rank. In the sentence, how she scored the top rank is the noun clause because it answers the question, the biggest point of concern is what. And the answer will obviously be how she scored the top rank. And in the sentence, this clause is the object. So that's it with noun clauses. Now moving on to adverbial clauses. A subordinate clause that acts as an adverb in a sentence is the adverbial clause. It modifies the main verb or adverb in a sentence. Adverbial clauses answer the question when, where, why and how. எந்த ஒரு subordinate clause ஒரு sentenceல adverb function ஆகுதோ அதுதான் நம்ம adverbial clause அப்படின்னு சொல்லுவோம். Adverbial clauses main verbs ஐயும் other adverbs in a sentence ஐயும் modify பண்ணும் and when, where, why, how அப்படிங்கிற questions adverbial clauses answer பண்ணும். Below are the examples of adverbial clauses. Let's see each of them now. I cried when I first went to school. In the sentence, when I first went to school is the clause. And this clause is modifying the verb cried. And if you ask the question, I cried when? The answer will be when I first went to school. That makes it an adverbial clause. The second one is, always do your best whichever field you are in. In the example, whichever field you are in is the adverbial clause. The reason is it answers the question when. Always do your best when. And the answer will be whichever field you are in. And it modifies the verb do, and that makes it an adverbial clause. The third example is, I will come with you wherever you go. In this sentence, if I ask the question, I will come with you where? And the answer will be wherever you go. So that is the adverbial clause. And this clause is modifying the verb will come. The last sentence is, he acts as if he is afraid of ghosts. In this sentence, as if he is afraid of ghosts is the adverbial clause, and the reason is it modifies the verb acts and answers the question how. He acts how. The answer will be as if he is afraid of ghosts. That is why this is also an adverbial clause. இந்த எல்லா எக்ஸாம்பிள்ஸையுமே நீங்கள் நோட்டீஸ் பண்ணியிருந்தீங்கன்னா you might have understood that all the adverbial clauses that we discussed here are subordinate clauses. Based on the function of adverbial clauses, they are classified into 5 types. They are adverbial clauses of time, adverbial clauses of place, adverbial clauses of manner, adverbial clauses of reason or cause, and adverbial clause of condition. இந்த ஒவ்வொரு டைப்பையும் இப்போ நம்ம டீட்டெயிலாக படிக்க போகிறோம். The first one is adverbial clause of time. A subordinate clause which acts as an adverb in a sentence and denotes time is adverbial clause of time. Adverbial clauses of time answer the question when. Examples பாருங்க. She will come as soon as she completes the project. In the sentence, as soon as she completes the project is the subordinate clause, and this clause is modifying the verb will come. And similarly, it answers the question when. She will come when. The answer will be as soon as she completes the project. So that is why this is an example of adverbial clause. The next one, whenever he sings, the crowd will be gathered. In the sentence, whenever he sings அப்படிங்கிறது தான் subordinate clause, and in the clause it comes as the answer for the question the crowd will be gathered when, and the clause is modifying the verb will be, and that makes it an adverbial clause of time. The third example is, they left the place when the police came. In the sentence, when you ask the question they left the place when, the answer will be when the police came. And this clause is a subordinate clause modifying the verb left, and that makes it an adverbial clause of time. The fourth one is, the boy cries whenever he sees a dog. When you ask the question the boy cries when, the answer will be whenever he sees a dog, and this is an example of a subordinate clause, and this clause is modifying the verb cries. That is why this is also an example of adverbial clause of time. The last example is, I went home after the match completed. In this sentence, after the match completed is the subordinate clause answering the question I went home when, and it modifies the verb went. அதனால தான் இந்த clauseம் it is an example of adverbial clause of time. Next, moving on to adverbial clause of place. A subordinate clause which acts as an adverb in a sentence and denotes place is called adverbial clause of place. These clauses answer the question where. Let's look at some examples. She will come along with me wherever I go. If I ask the question she will come along with me where, the answer will be wherever I go. Since it answers the question where, this is an example of adverbial clause of place. The next example is, he sings at the Grand Stadium in Central Park. In the sentence, at the Grand Stadium in Central Park அப்படிங்கிறது தான் adverbial clause of place. The reason is it is a subordinate clause answering the question he sings where, and it is modifying the verb sings, and that is why this is an adverbial clause of place. The third example is, I meet new people wherever I go. When I ask the question, I meet new people where, the answer will be wherever I go, and this is a subordinate clause modifying the verb meet. That is why everywhere I go is the adverbial clause of place in this sentence. The last example, anywhere I went, people inquired on my health. In the sentence la, if I ask the question people inquired on my health where, அதுக்கு ஆன்சரா anywhere I went அப்படிங்கிறது வரும். And in the clause is an example of subordinate clause and it modifies the verb inquired. அதனால this is an adverbial clause of place. அடுத்ததா நம்ம பார்க்க போறது adverbial clause of manner. A subordinate clause which acts as an adverb in a sentence and modifies the verb, thereby showing how things are done, is adverbial clause of manner. Adverbial clauses of manner answer the question how. ஒரு சென்டென்ஸ்ல adverbial clauses of manner எப்படி ஈஸியா ஐடென்டிஃபை பண்ணலாம் அப்படின்னா they begin with as if, as though. Let's look at some examples now. He shouts as if she were right. இந்த சென்டென்ஸ்ல as if she were right அப்படிங்கிறது தான் adverbial clause of manner because I told you adverbial clauses of manner begin with as if. And this clause answers the question he shouts how. The second example is she looked as if she was in some trouble. In the sentence, if I ask the question she looked how, the answer will be as if she was in some trouble. அதனால இதுதான் adverbial clause of manner and it is modifying the verb looked. The third example, he is crying as though he is terribly hurt. In the sentence as though he is terribly hurt is the adverbial clause of manner because I told you as though அப்படினு வந்தா it is an adverbial clause of manner and it answers the question how. He is crying how. And this clause is modifying the verb is crying. That's it with adverbial clause of manner. Now we'll see about adverbial clauses of reason. A subordinate clause which acts as an adjective in a sentence and highlights the reason for something that is happening is adverbial clause of reason. காரணத்தை குறிக்க யூஸ் பண்ற clause தான் நம்ம adjective clause அப்படினு சொல்லுவோம். These answer the question why. Look at these examples. He came late as he missed his train. He came late why? If I ask this question the answer will be as he missed his train. This is an example of a subordinate clause and it is modifying the verb came. That's why this is an adverbial clause of reason. The second one, they cancelled the trip because the weather was harsh. In the sentence because the weather was harsh அப்படிங்கிறது they cancelled the trip why அப்படிங்கிறதுக்கு ஆன்சரா வருது. And this is an example of subordinate clause as well which is modifying the verb cancelled. They cancelled the trip அப்படிங்கிறதுக்கு காரணம் சொல்றதுக்கு தான் இந்த clause நம்ம யூஸ் பண்றோம். That is why this is also an adverbial clause of reason. The last example is she was angry with Ben that he did not invite her. In the sentence that he did not invite her அப்படிங்கிற subordinating clause answers the question she was angry with Ben why. This clause is highlighting the reason why she was angry with Ben. And this clause is modifying the verb was. That is why this is an example of adverbial clause of reason. The next type of adverbial clause is adverbial clause of condition. A subordinate clause which acts as an adverb in a sentence and highlights the condition for something to happen is adverbial clause of condition. ஒரு செயல் நடப்பதற்கான கண்டிஷனை சொல்றது தான் adverbial clause of condition அப்படின்னு சொல்லுவோம். இந்த எக்ஸாம்பிள்ஸ் பாருங்க. If it does not rain today, I will come to meet you. So இந்த சென்டென்ஸ்ல I will come to meet you அப்படிங்கிற செயலுக்கான கண்டிஷன் என்ன அப்படின்னா if it does not rain today. அதனால if it does not rain today is the adverbial clause of condition. The next example is they cannot play the match unless they pay the fine. இந்த சென்டென்ஸ்லையும் பாருங்க they cannot play the match அப்படிங்கிற செயலுக்கு கண்டிஷனா எது இருக்கு அப்படின்னா unless they pay the fine. அதனால unless they pay the fine அப்படிங்கிற subordinating clause தான் adverbial clause of condition. The last example is I will attend the party provided that my wounded leg heals. இந்த சென்டென்ஸ்ல I will attend the party அப்படிங்கிற செயலுக்கான கண்டிஷன் என்னன்னா provided that my wounded leg heals. அதனால கண்டிஷனை குறிக்கிற clause அதாவது provided that my wounded leg heals is the adverbial clause of condition. So that's it with adverbial clauses. Now moving on to what adjectival clauses are. Adjectival clauses are also called as relative clauses. A subordinate clause that acts as an adjective in a sentence is the adjectival clause It modifies the noun or pronoun in a sentence. Adjectival clauses begin with the words why, which, whose, that. ஒரு சென்டென்ஸ்ல எந்த ஒரு சபார்டினேட் கிளாஸ் adjectiveக்கான ஃபங்க்ஷனை பண்ணுதோ அதுதான் நம்ம adjective clause அப்படின்னு சொல்லுவோம். Adjectival clauses ஒரு சென்டென்ஸ் உடைய நவுனையும் ப்ரொனவுனையும் தான் மாடிஃபை பண்ணும். இதுக்கான எக்ஸாம்பிள்ஸ் பார்க்கலாம். The person who comes here monthly is the house owner. இந்த சென்டென்ஸ் பாருங்க. The subject is the person. இந்த சப்ஜெக்டை மாடிஃபை பண்ண யூஸ் பண்ணுறது who comes here monthly அப்படிங்கிற clause. Since this clause is modifying the noun, this is an example of adjectival clause. The second one is, the dress which is on the table belongs to Kate. In the sentence, the dress அப்படிங்கிற சப்ஜெக்டை மாடிஃபை பண்ண யூஸ் பண்ணுற adjectival clause தான் which is on the table. The third example is, he is the one whose brother won the trophy last year. இந்த சென்டென்ஸில் பார்த்தீங்கன்னா he அப்படிங்கிற சப்ஜெக்டை whose brother won the trophy last year அப்படிங்கிறது மாடிஃபை பண்ணுது. Since it is a collection of words, this is a clause and this type of clause is adjectival clause. The last example, she asked me the reason why I left the party. இந்த சென்டென்ஸில் பார்த்தீங்கன்னா the reason அப்படிங்கிற நவுனை why I left the party அப்படிங்கிற clause தான் மாடிஃபை பண்ணுது. அதனால it is the adjectival clause in this sentence.